Hi, my name is Michael McDonnell, and I am the Cybersecurity Librarian. This video is a re-recording of a talk I gave many times between 2014 and 2017 in Calgary, Alberta. This is a short version of the talk and contains just the content originally presented in 2016. This is a 2016 rewind. That's right, it's not an up-to-date talk for 2020. This is just descriptions of threats that I covered in 2016. This audio is a new recording, but the slides are old. So why republish an old talk? Well, recently a friend who had seen the talk several times, he said, "Has anything changed?" And this video is my answer for comparison purposes before I publish a new up-to-date for 2020 version. A lot of the threats we're facing today and some of the ones that came to light 6 years ago, some are changed, some are the same. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this video, you want to see more, subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on LinkedIn. And now let's get started with the original talk. Let me set the stage for you. Imagine you're at work. You're at one of the world's largest oil producers, and it's a normal day. You're working at your computer, and suddenly you notice there's a lot of IT folks buzzing about. Someone comes and asks to see your laptop. They seem anxious. They go away, they come back, they check your laptop again. At some point you notice some men in dark suits show up, all the IT people, some executives, all of them go into a conference room. Then the IT folks come out of the room and they start collecting laptops. No, you cannot save your work. No, this is more important. Then that night on the news, you see the head of the National Security Service asking all of the energy companies in the country to look for signs of a cyber attack and contact them immediately. A foreign government is suspected of spying on your nation's energy companies and stealing information. Your company's been hacked, and not just a little hacked, a major act of nation-state espionage with deep-reaching implications. And that actually happened in 2014 in Norway. On March 12, 2014, Norway's Statoil, one of the world's major producers of oil, had discovered it had been hacked. Their battle with the hackers lasted 3 days. There were no visible signs of infection or problems reported by the users, no malfunctions, no errors, no warnings, no overtly malicious signs. They did not know it at first, but the attackers had a strong foothold in many of their systems. The attackers were monitoring their every move. When a virus was detected by IT, the attackers would alter the virus to avoid further detection, all the while the attack was in progress. Statoil's team battled the attack for 3 days. Eventually, they sought assistance from Norway's National Security Service and confiscated 40 infected computers from the staff. And on March 15th, 3 days later, they finally believed they had it under control. However, other Norwegian companies were under attack at the same time. There are over 300 oil and gas companies in Norway. In total, 50 were publicly confirmed to be breached as part of the same attack. NorCERT, Norway's National Computer Emergency Response Team, attributed it to a group called Energetic Bear, also known as Dragonfly, otherwise known as the Russians. What happened in Norway is not new or unique, and it's becoming more common. This presentation is an attempt to catalog open source intelligence on energy sector cyber threats. That is, threats that are unique or highly targeted toward the energy sector. I won't cover threats that affect all companies like ransomware worms. I won't cover threats that target other industries unless there's some major focus on the energy sector. These are going to be the threats that are important to oil and gas, electricity, and other energy providers. And I'm going to classify these threats into 3 groups by the assumed motivation of the attacker. So if you want to take a look at a risk profile, we're going to be looking at hacktivism, espionage, and cyber warfare. And all of these threats can be placed on a grid based on their risk. That is, the likelihood of some bad thing happening and the potential impact that thing would have, no matter how likely. Hacktivism being... Let's start by looking at hacktivism. Hacktivism is a high probability, low impact type of threat. That is, it's fairly common to be targeted by hacktivists, but the impact they have tends to be low. A great example of hacktivism would be the activities of Anonymous. So here we have a screenshot from OpFuelStrike from 2012. And this follows the standard pattern we'd see. In 2012, a group identified itself as, quote, anonymous, and declared an operation against the energy industry called OpFuelStrike. They declared a long statement complaining about the rising cost of fuel, and that statement ended with, "We, the people, will not put up with the continuous price rise of fuel. Therefore, Anonymous has decided to target 25 of the largest oil companies in a bid to make them accept the millions of dollars profit they already make and to freeze any further price rises. Distributed denial of service attacks, defacements, and leaks toward the listed or targeted companies' websites will all be classified as part of Anonymous." They gave a list of the targets and named most of the world's major oil and gas companies. And as is typical with anonymous operations, shortly after they started, they publicly declared success and began to display evidence of those they had hacked. In this case, you can see a screenshot that was dumped on a site called Pastebin, and they appear to have hacked one of their targets, Royal Dutch Shell. And you can see the target, royaldutchshellplc.com, and then a number of email addresses and passwords that they had gathered from the compromised site. So it appears that they were successful. Why am I saying that hacktivism is usually low impact? Well, here's a screenshot of the website they hacked, royaldutchshellplc.com. And as you can see, it is not Shell. It is, in fact, a Shell protest site. And on the right-hand side, you see a screenshot from another hacker saying, hey, maybe next time you can choose a better target. Sorry to be a pain, but that would seem to be a Shell protest site you hacked. It's really important to note that there's no single cohesive group called Anonymous. There are many unrelated groups who identify themselves under that brand, and they do that to appear larger and more profound than they might be. Their attacks are as much about marketing as they are about actually doing damage. In most cases, the damage they do is due to the overreaction by their targets and not from the actual hacks they carry out. And this makes sense because hacktivists are protesters. They want to get their message out. OpFuelStrike is just one of a long line of anonymous ops targeting the energy sector. The next year, there was one called OpPetrol, and that actually went through several iterations year after year. That was run by a group called AnonGhost, also claiming to be, quote, anonymous. And they all start with a bold statement about the damage they would do, but mostly what they end up doing is defacing websites and putting up their particular political message. Here's another example, Operation Green Rights. Some of these activist groups, like Op Green Rights, are very persistent and very open and exist for a very long time. Op Green Rights is one of the ones that's the most open. You can log into their chat channel, see what they're doing, and talk with them. You can see what they're up to. Like other hacktivists, they have a loose affiliation of different groups, and they all advertise under that banner called Anonymous. And here we see some examples on the left, a defaced website where they put up their particular protest message about something going on in Italy. In the middle, another defaced website where they put up a message in favor of Sustainable Energy Week. And then on the right is their Twitter account, where they advertise everything they're doing. And here's some examples that came a year later. We have a screenshot from their actual chat room. Anyone could log in. You could go log in right now. And in the top, one of the particular things they're discussing is performing a denial of service attack against the Brazilian government. And then the same material from their Twitter channel asking people to get together and perform a denial of service. What's really interesting is the prospect of a denial of service may sound high impact, but mostly what's happened under Anonymous is those denial of service attacks are more about getting a lot of people together under one umbrella, and they don't have a huge impact. What they do is help gather people together and spread a message. Let's contrast that with espionage. Espionage is a high probability event as well. If you're in the energy sector, you are going to be targeted for the information you have by foreign nation states. But the impact is probably what we would call low impact. And I'll discuss why that is in a second. Night Dragon was a nation-state-sponsored espionage campaign that specifically targeted the energy sector. The attack was publicized by analysts at McAfee, the well-known maker of security software, in 2012, and they attributed it to the Chinese government. The companies listed on the screen either disclosed that they were compromised by Night Dragon or public records demonstrated that they were compromised. Journalists and so forth had figured out who had been a victim through various information leaks. It's thought that actually many more were affected, but that there was no disclosure. There were some alarming and notable indicators associated with Night Dragon, and they make this much more sophisticated than most known attacks of the time. So for instance, early stages of the attack used social engineering and spear phishing so that the attacker could get a foothold in the victim network. They also used exploitation of web servers to gain access to the victim network. While using exploitation was common in the time, seeing a single attacker who used multiple methods to gain that foothold, that wasn't so common. Once the attacker gained the foothold, they would attempt to gather all the records in the company's Active Directory. They wanted to steal passwords, but also gain information about who worked at the company, what was the organization's structure. Once they would have Active Directory compromised, they could use the passwords they stole to access virtually anything. And the final thing that was new was that the attackers created a persistent presence on the victim's network by installing what are called RATs, or remote access tools. Each component of this attack had been used elsewhere. The components weren't new, but to see a single attacker that was well organized, persistent, and using all of these in combination was new. This led McAfee to publish their report called Anatomy of a Hack. What you see on the screen is a model that today we would call the cyber kill chain or the APT attack model. It's a pattern of behaviors seen in many sophisticated attacks. It includes careful planning and reconnaissance before attacking the victim. They only need a small initial compromise to gain a foothold. Maybe a single computer, the mailroom, any worker, an accountant. Then once they have that foothold, they slowly gather more information. Maybe they steal some passwords. Maybe they get access to additional systems. Then they began to gather up valuable data. They don't try to exfiltrate it. They don't try to upload it yet. They don't want to be caught too soon. After they expand their access internally, then finally, once they've got what they want, they exfiltrate that data, steal it, and go silent. Maybe they maintain that foothold on a few computers going unnoticed, or maybe they disappear. This is what we're up against when it comes to espionage in the energy sector. After Night Dragon, a series of major attacks were identified around 2014 and onward. Initially, these were thought to be different threat actors, different unrelated attacks, all going by different names. Over time, it was found that many of these were in fact the same, so they went by names like Lights Out, Havex, and they turned out all to be related state-sponsored Russian espionage campaigns. Like Night Dragon, they stole information. Like Night Dragon, there was a lot of reconnaissance, laying low with a foothold in the network, using custom malware to gain a backdoor and remote access. Most terrifying, though, was that some of the virus code found in these attacks was shown to have the capability of controlling industrial control systems. And while it wasn't observed in use, the very existence of that code makes us think these attacks could go beyond espionage. The growing threat from espionage actually foreshadows another category of attack the energy sector is interested in, and that's cyberwar. Unlike the previous two categories, cyberwar would be low probability. We hope we don't see it. However, if it does occur, it's very likely to be high impact. In 2008, there was a pipeline explosion in Turkey that is largely considered to be the first documented act of cyberwar. The details of this attack are reported differently in many sources. I encourage you to read and draw your own conclusions. However, there is no doubt that this pipeline exploded under mysterious circumstances. Above is a quote from Bloomberg Business Report. Although as many as 60 hours of surveillance video was erased by the hackers, a single infrared camera not connected to the same network captured images of two men with laptop computers walking near the pipeline days before the explosion. According to one of the people who reviewed the video, the men wore black military-style uniforms without insignias, similar to the garb worn by Special Forces troops. There are other examples of cyber war, and we're not going to cover them for the sake of time, but cyber warfare is a potential reality for us in the energy sector, and it's very likely that any cyber attack as an act of war will target the energy sector first, whether it's blowing up pipelines or shutting down electrical grids. These are the types of things we're facing. So let me conclude by answering the pressing question, why is this happening to us? Why is it happening now? And there are 4 answers to this. First, the energy sector is an easy target. Despite high revenues, our security practice lags behind other industries. Second, these advanced threats are now common. They're not exceptional, they're not rare. Those unable to detect and respond to advanced threats will become their victims. This is true in every sector, not just the energy sector. Third, the attackers targeting the energy sector are highly motivated and persistent. Nations, states, and hacktivists will not be dissuaded easily. And finally, as an industry sector, we're probably 5 years behind others in recognizing cyber as a risk. And let me illustrate these points with a few examples. We in the energy sector are easy targets because we leave our most critical and vulnerable assets exposed and unprotected on a regular basis. We protect our corporate IT systems better than we protect our industrial systems. Here are some screenshots from multiple events where people scanned the open internet and found unprotected industrial systems. And then they published those results for all to see. On the left is a story in Wired magazine. On the right is a well-known incident where a hacker published screenshots of many industrial systems that weren't protected and joking about the severity. You can see in the screenshot, he says, hey, another chart with megawatt hours on it. It looks Korean. The methods they used in the results were presented at a conference, and unfortunately, anyone can do this in minutes because now there are search engines that catalog exposed industrial system applications. Hackers don't have to do the work of finding systems like these guys did. You can just search for it like you would with Google. An open question would be, do you have a list of your exposed assets? You probably don't. The hackers probably do. And the only thing that's defending you is they can't identify which assets are yours. Our second point, that advanced attacks are common, is illustrated by the APT lifecycle model, shown on the screen. This pattern is so common that it's now used as a standard threat model by analysts. Attackers no longer rely strictly on automated cookie-cutter malware. They plan, they employ stealth, they bide their time. They're goal-driven and they're persistent. Some important facts about this model: the initial victim is almost never the intended target. Attackers do not care which systems they compromise on your network. They want any system. Then they're going to escalate their access once they get that foothold. Similarly, your company may not be the intended target, but they'll breach you anyways. They may be after your customers, your partners, your vendors, etc. They may even be interested in you just because you're in the same industry or in the same city. Our third point, that attackers are highly motivated, is plainly clear in something called the Verizon Data Breach Report, or DBIR. This is an annual report from Verizon that reviews hundreds of incidents from dozens of sources to look at trends. In 2014, the DBIR had a 10-year retrospective, and the results are striking. So in this chart, what we see is prior to 2013, the patterns of attack were very different from today. Today, we see espionage as a major category, but that was rarely seen in the past. Similarly, web app attacks, which are favored by hacktivists, are much more common than they were in the past. And finally, I would make the point that the energy sector is behind in prioritizing the risk associated with cyber attack. It was only in 2014 that that risk reached the top 10 used by energy sector CEOs and risk managers. On the screen, what we see are some screenshots from two reports commonly used by energy sector CEOs and risk managers. Let me quote from one of these. For the first time, cyber risk has made it into the top 10 global risks in the Alliance Risk Barometer survey from 2014. Willis is a global risk advisor and insurance broker. They have a report on energy in 2014 that has a special focus on cyber threats. Ernst & Young's annual survey of CEO risks found the same thing. This does give us some hope that finally leadership in our sector recognizes that cybercrime and espionage are risks to our individual companies and to our sector as a whole. What we do about it is an open question. I began this talk by citing the example of cyber espionage that occurred in Norway in 2014. And I'd like to end by asking, well, could it happen here and now? Well, in fact, it already happened here, and it will happen again tomorrow. In Calgary in 2012, the RCMP and CSIS went around Calgary notifying energy companies that they had evidence that data was actively being exfiltrated from energy companies. We can see an almost identical example of what happened in Norway, but closer to home. In 2012, energy companies in Calgary, Alberta, were notified of breaches by CSIS and the RCMP. In this case, the attack was attributed to China, not Russia. And on the screen, you can see many news articles about what occurred. I know of at least one organization that said, no thanks, we're fine, when they were offered the confidential briefing on the ongoing attacks. If you're offered that kind of briefing, I encourage you to say yes. It was the experience of knowing that some people had opted not to receive information about the ongoing attacks that led me to develop this open source intelligence-based briefing. If you're interested in much more in-depth information on energy sector hacking, I have a much longer version of this presentation that catalogs many more threats and goes into details. I actually think the Energy Sector Hacker Report does a better job if you don't mind reading. Okay, thanks for watching this rewound edition of my talk from 2016. If you follow the news, I think you already know that things have changed in some ways, but not in other. The energy sector is a bigger target than ever. Many of these things that happened mid-decade, well, they predicted what's happening today. If there's demand, I'll prepare an updated 2020 version of this talk, highlighting some newer examples. So subscribe if you want to keep up with future videos and contact me with any questions you have.